All right, next up, the Fed is more worried about Trump tariffs than interest rates or the money supply, and they're just panicking over the Trump tariffs. So we got to talk about it. Today was Fed Day. They didn't do anything on the interest rate front, but we're going to have Dan Clifton, partner and head of policy research at Strategic Securities, John Carney, Breitbart finance and economics editor, and co-author of the daily Breitbart Business Digest. Gentlemen, thank you. You know, Dan Clifton, reading your report today, hearkening back to 2018, the Fed may make the exact same mistakes. They're going to, I mean, and by the way, this is a Federal Reserve Board in Washington where the staff and whoever governors, what was the number? 90% or over 80% donated money to Democrats. So I just want to want to remind people of that. Now, your point is, and I think John's going to agree, but your point is the Fed is crazy about tariffs. The economists at the Fed are going to say it's inflationary, just like they did in 2018 and 2019, and they might raise rates and really damage the Trump boom. What do you make of this, Dan Clifton?
Yeah, so let me just, as you know better than anybody because you were in the White House at that time, we did a massive pro-growth tax cut at the end of 2017. We did small tariffs on China, maybe about $50 billion of tariffs on China over the course of 2018. And the Fed just got really worried that this was inflationary, that the higher growth from the tax cut and the tariffs. And so they made a decision to keep rates high and elevated throughout all of 2018, Larry. And what they did was they cut off growth. You could see it in the yield curve flattening all throughout the year. And boom, December of 2018 comes and the S&P 500 falls 20% in the month of December. And they were then forced to cut. So they were wrong. Trump was right. And that's okay. People make mistakes. I don't get everything right. But they are literally using the same logic today to justify higher interest rates now. Yeah. They were all about cutting rates in September. Today, they're all about, whoa, the inflation is not moderating down, and we're worried about tariffs. This is three meetings in a row where they've been focused on tariffs.
John Carney, I mean, Dan makes awful good points here. By the way, I think that, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my suspicion, let me put it to you that way, the Fed's staff, the Washington staff, and 300 or 400 economists, they think Trump, first of all, is not a good president. They're not Trumpers. They're anti-Trumpers. Second of all, they think the tariffs will be inflationary. That's one way of getting at Trump, which is what Dan is describing. Third of all, John, as you pointed out, we've discussed, the Fed thinks, strong growth is inflationary. They have this Phillips curve thing. So on all three counts, and that's what's so worrisome. And you have the Fed spokesperson, the Wall Street Journal reporter, Nick Timiraos. He's writing columns about the Fed's fear of tariffs, right? Timiraos is always a leading indicator. You look at his stories, he never seems to mention any conservatives or Republicans, just the liberals, anti-Trumpers. Anyway, what do you make of this, John? Do you see it? Are you worried about it? Or would the Fed just do what they're supposed to do, John Carney? Wait, do nothing until the Trump plan is passed and implemented.
I think they're playing a very interesting game. Because you're absolutely right. The Wall Street Journal printed Nick Timiraos' story, and it was clearly meant to say that the Fed is very worried about inflation from these tariffs. But today, in his press conference, Powell took a very different stance. He absolutely refused to hit back at the tariffs. I think that he may have gotten the message overnight that Wall Street Journal article was a mistake, that he was politicizing the Fed. And he very clearly said, I'm not going to talk about tariffs. They asked him, will you talk about DEI then? No, we wouldn't talk about that. Will you talk about deporting people? No, I won't talk about that. He actually got a little religion overnight, and he's trying to get back into the Fed's lane, which is where he should be, controlling inflation, not, talking about what the proper trade policy of the United States.
But the thing that's so amazing, look, I don't believe this tariff, whatever Jay Powell may or may not have said today, I don't think the tariff fear is over. I think that you've got a lot of economists in the board whispering in his ear. But there's nothing to report about yet. But Dan, what's so interesting, we've now, I think Colombia, the Trump threatening Colombia, on accepting deported criminals back to Colombia. We didn't get the 25 or 50% tariff on Colombia because of Trump's tariff diplomacies. They didn't do it. And I think, judging from what Howard Lutnick said today in his confirmation hearings for Commerce Secretary, and what the press room said, what the press secretary said yesterday, it sounds like Canada and Mexico are helping us sufficiently, U.S. government, on the border, so we won't get those 25% tariffs either. I mean, in other words, it's so interesting. The people who are crazed about tariffs don't understand Trump. They don't understand his negotiation. They don't understand tariff diplomacy. Because he's so good at it, we don't get the kind of tariff hikes that everyone's, talking about.
Well, Larry, I think you're absolutely right. And what I would say is that the threat of tariffs are not real if people just think that it's a threat. I think President Trump will use those tariffs if he's not getting what he wants, whether that's in Mexico or China or wherever it's going to be. The key issue here is that what is the plan? We may do tariffs and we may do a 15% corporate domestic rate cut at the same time. You don't know that. And does that change your equation overall? The Fed should not be in this business of trying to do that. And what they're doing is they're taking all the bad, what they see the bad, a tighter immigration and the tariffs, and they're not looking at the good, the construction of the LNG export terminals and the energy renaissance that's coming and the pro-growth tax cuts. And if you're only focused on the bad, you're going to get monetary policy wrong and you're going to make a great policy error. And that's the lesson from 2018. And unfortunately, much of the news flow from the Fed since the election has been following that path. And so their rhetoric may have changed. I think that's a good thing. But actions are going to speak louder than words.
John Carney, I got 20 seconds. I would take a 15% tariff and then put the 15% tariff proceeds into a 15% tax rate on businesses. And might even put it a 15% capital gains tax in there too. What do you think? 15, 15, 15.
Larry,
John.
we could do an even bigger tax cut than that. The corporate, if we had tariffs in place that were generating revenues, we could almost eliminate the corporate tax altogether. Can you imagine how great that would be for American businesses?
That is hot stuff.
If we brought that down. So 15% might be a good starting place, but let's go lower. Let's aim for the best, get that tax rate as far down as we can. Trump loves McKinley. He loves he loves bringing up
I got to jump.
when we were generating real revenue.
Thanks to both of you, really. Thank you. John Carney, Dan Clifton, you're both terrific. Thanks.